The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Jim Shull, filling in this week for Len Testa, and this is our show for the week of March 19th, 2023. I'm sitting behind the microphone because this week Len is sailing the ocean blue, seeking pirate gold in the Caribbean. But before he set sail, he left me with this parchment scroll, on which he had written that on today's show, well, we're going to be talking about the passing of a true Disney legend, a man I knew and was mentored by, a design extraordinaire, responsible for a smiling clock, terrific tikis, and a museum of the weird. Of course, this could be none other than the Imagineer Rolly Crump. But before we do that, we turn to the man from New England, a man who, when we talked before the show about the snow that California was receiving, well, he responded with the words, "Hold my beer." Mr. Jim Hill. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Mr. Shull. How are you today?
I don't have the snow you do, but once again, sunny California is giving us a little bit of moisture in the form of rain.
It is. In fact, what's fascinating is that the atmospheric river that you and me and Len were dealing with out in California a week before last caught up with me when I flew back out here to New England. In fact, got off the plane and just beat the storm in, which then promptly dropped 3 feet of snow on my corner of New Hampshire and knocked out the power for 60 hours. And that was a joy.
The gift that keeps on giving, isn't it?
Well, this is true. This is true, and so I guess hearing what you're dealing with right now, I guess I shouldn't put away the snow shovel.
Yeah, well, someday we'll be complaining about the sun and the heat, and reaching for the sunscreen.
But again, thank you so much for agreeing to sit in for Mr. Testa, who, by the way, if there's any God at all, is dealing with a hurricane out in the Caribbean, all right?
Maybe this is the way we take all the bad so he can have a little bit of the good.
There we go.
Hey, there's a lot to discuss on today's show, though. Mm-hmm. But before we get started, I want to acknowledge some new subscribers. Forgive me as I mangle your names, but they are Coter Prinks, Happy Bear 25, and Patrick. Oh, and longtime subscribers Dano, Jessica with 3 A's, and Just Plain Chris. Jim, these are the Disney cast members who are responsible for making sure that all of those animatronic commanders-in-chief remain inside of Disney World's Hall of Presidents, which is a lot harder than it looks, given that the robotic Teddy Roosevelt, well, he keeps attempting to slip out of that theater so he can then go on safari over at the Jungle Cruise, which, let me tell you, is making those robotic elephants there pretty nervous. In fact, I've heard the elephants are keeping their trunks packed just in case they need to make a quick getaway. Oh. True story.
I love the last joke. Okay. But before we get to the news, quick corrections corner. On last week's feature piece about the Partners statue, we talked about how it was Disneyland's State Fair and how it was the fall of 1988 edition of the seasonal event, where they set up a Ferris wheel in the center of the hub, which was what supposedly compelled Marty Sklar to finally do something to prevent anything additional being set up in that part of the park, which would then ruin guest sightlines of Sleeping Beauty Castle. And when you hang out with an actual Imagineer, on Friday, March 10th, as we're hiking through Disneyland, it's myself and Len and Guy Selga. We're on our way to check out the West Coast edition of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, which, by the way, we'll get to in a moment. Mr. Shull was sharing a story with Guy about how it was actually the gift giver extraordinaire, which that was set up in 85 for what, Disneyland's 30th anniversary?
Yeah, it was set up then. There was a period of time when Disneyland had these, celebrations, and this happened to be one of them. And it was a huge device right in the middle of the hub, right in front of the castle. And Mr. Sklar, as an Imagineer, I got to be in a lot of meetings with Marty, and there was one particular meeting where Marty came in not such a happy mood.
This was because of the thing in the center of the park, right? They had actually excavated down, because wasn't the gimmick of the gift giver extraordinaire that there was a car underneath it, and that every so often, every 30,000th visitor to Disneyland would be awarded an opportunity to win the car, right?
Well, I think that's the story, but I personally never witnessed it. And maybe that was part of the problem. If they'd given out a few more cars, we might have actually kept the gift giver still there to this day. But no, it didn't work out so well. And Marty was not all that happy. And as a result, he had a solution. Well, they'll never be able to do another one of those, he told us, because we're going to put Walt there, and no one's ever going to replace Walt. They wouldn't dare.
By the way, folks, if you're interested in learning more about the gift giver extraordinaire, if you head over to Live Auctioneers, the website, they actually sold at a recent auction the concept art that Imagineer John Horney originally drew for this kind of Rube Goldberg type device that would rise up out of the ground. It's really worth checking out. As part of this trip, when Len and Jim Shull and I were, along with Guy, were out in L.A., we got to visit WDI. And we as part of our visit to the facility, we got into now it's the Blaine Gibson Sculpture Studio. That's what the room's known as.
It is
now,
today. It is today.
Okay.
But that's a recent addition for their.
Okay.
Well, folks, as you're walking into this, you have to understand you're walking deep into the bowels of the back of 1401 Glendale, which is the main headquarters on the campus of WDI there in California. And there always was a sculpture studio. Actually, there are two. There was a small one where they kept all the busts and the maquettes being very small clay models. But that's where Blaine Gibson worked. However, as with all things Imagineering, you don't have your name on the door. And so it's only been the last, I would say, 3-4 years that they've actually had this beautiful plaque now, this bas-relief plaque that gives credit to this being Blaine Gibson's sculptural studio. And as you walk in through these huge metal doors that are, think of them as vault doors, basically, because it's a climate-controlled facility, because after all, this is clay they're protecting. But you get to, we got to see, Jim, the heads of presidents, and what was the other thing that we saw?
What didn't we see? I mean, for me, what was amazing, the longer you stood in that room, the more stuff you saw. Like, for example, I want to say high up on one shelf toward the right, there were the very models for the very first animatronics, and I'm talking like the 61 Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, and then there were maquettes for attractions that never got built, like the Circus Disney thing that was supposed to be built as part of Discovery Bay. But yeah, I mean, that you're not wrong about the president's head, just sort of looking in and seeing, both George H. and George W. Bush. And no, it was quite a thrill to be in there. But as they take us in there for a few minutes, we have to continue on with the tour. And as we're leaving the room, there, right by the door, is the 1-inch to 1-foot representation of the partner statue. But it's not the partner statue that's in the park. It's one of the earlier iterations that Blaine did. And it's the one that I actually talked about in part of that feature. It's the one where Mickey's holding an ice cream cone, and our host had heard the show, and it's like, oh, hey, your thing right there, actual proof that, I got a story right, folks. One, I did one, so.
But you're always sincere.
Isn't that the joke? The key to life is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you can fake anything.
Oh, yes. I'll write that down now, folks.
Okay. All right. Another quick correction here. Tim Grassley reached out via Twitter to say that when it came to the happiest homecoming on Earth, it wasn't Mickey's Jamming Jungle that was the Animal Kingdom special offering for Disneyland's 50th anniversary.
Really?
Well, yeah, Mr. Grassley is right. It turns out Mickey's Jamming Jungle began running at Animal Kingdom back on October 1st, 2001, and that was part of Walt Disney World's 100th Year of Magic celebration, which keyed off of the 100th anniversary of Walt Disney's birth, not the 50th anniversary of Disneyland. And that ran at Animal Kingdom through 2014. As for what was done for Disney Animal Kingdom for the happiest celebration on Earth, they actually had two components. They had Lucky the Dinosaur and Expedition Everest. And in fact, to back up his claim, Tim produced photos of the signs that were created for Walt Disney World that keyed off of the happiest homecoming. And so apologies for getting that wrong. But here's the thing. Lucky the Dino, I mean, you were lucky if you actually got to see Lucky the Dinosaur at Animal Kingdom. He was only there from June of 2005 through mid-August of that same year. And then didn't they take him to Hong Kong?
Well, he made a world trip. I mean, Lucky was a moonshot because remember what Lucky was trying to do is all before that, animatronic characters were always fastened to the ground. I mean, you know, they didn't move, they didn't walk around, they didn't move. But Lucky was different because he actually could move, hence the name Moonshot. And yes, he came out of the R&D lab in California, and they took him down to, well, they took him to Animal Kingdom. They took him down to California Adventure for a while, where he was walking down the flat asphalt, which was actually concrete, kids, dragging his flower cart behind him on the Hollywood backlot before they put him on an airplane to send him to Hong Kong. So that dino got around.
He did. But he initially debuted at DCA because that was really close to R&D, right? So if things went south.
Oh, yeah. Again, this was kind of off Broadway for him because he'd been, showing and thrilling people if you were inside the campus walls. But now this was going to be the first time you could actually take him outside of those campus walls and take him into a theme park. But you're not wrong. If something went horribly wrong, it was a short, 45-minute drive back up to the lab to repair our little dinosaur friend.
I was fascinated by this moment in history in themed entertainment, what Disney was trying to do here. Because, think about it. In a short window of time, we got the Wall-E living character initiative figure. We got Lucky. And what was the other one? The Muppet one, right?
There was Benson Honeydew. And they were a little bit different because they didn't walk around. They got around that issue by having the two characters on a rolling cart. And that one was in Hong Kong several times for quite a while. And I think he was more proven as proof of concept than Lucky was.
Yeah, and I know he was also, or Bunsen and Beaker with the Muppet Mobile Labs were in Epcot for a time. But just what was fascinating is you saw these three, and it seemed to promise something huge was about to happen, and then the company went a different way. I mean,
a different way, but maybe also you wait for technology, because remember this, you always have an idea, but these ideas are moonshots, but sometimes you don't have the technology, but that doesn't mean the idea is abandoned. I mean, let's look at the video that Disney released just short time ago, where at South by Southwest, Disney had
you're right.
The character from the movie Zootopia. And
that's right, the Judy Hopps figure.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great example of the concept of a walk-around character does not mean that because you don't see it immediately in the parks doesn't mean it was a failure. It means maybe there was some technology, something that the stars weren't quite aligned correctly for it to be out. But when you start to see things like Judy Hopps, again, out in public, in a controlled environment, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be in the parks at some future date.
Interesting. Okay, this is definitely a story we're going to have to circle back on at some point. So,
well, I've taken my notes, page after page after page of notes.
Okay. Now, we mentioned Lucky the Dinosaur. We also should mention Expedition Everest, Legend of the Forbidden Mountain. So that's the second half of Disney's Animal Kingdom's contribution to the happiest celebration on Earth. So that begins soft opening in January of 2006, some 8 months after the happiest celebration gets underway. Official grand opening is held on April 7th of that same year, 11 months after it gets going. But by the way, Jim, Expedition Everest originally opened with a subtitle, Legend of the Forbidden Mountain, and as did Indiana Jones' Adventure, Temple of the Forbidden Eye back in 95. When did the extendo names fall out of vogue at WDI?
I don't think they ever really fall out of favor, because when we were in the park recently, you and Len and Guy and I, we were in the park where Star Wars Galactic Edge was a land. So I don't think those lands' names have fallen out of favor.
Yeah, well, that's true. In fact, what was it? During my late night sojourn to Disneyland in the rain, I got in 2 rides on Star Wars The Adventure Continues. To double back to Indy, worth noting that Adventureland attraction just came back online after a lengthy rehab, and seems to be getting some great notice about some of the effects that have been added and that sort of thing. Though, Jim, you were mentioning that you and your son Brian actually got a very early preview of the Indiana Jones Adventure, right?
Well, that's true. That's one of the advantages of being an Imagineer. And I assume, by the way, you're talking about not the new version that just opened, but the original version.
There we go.
And what happened was, it came about that one day, while I was working on some project for Tony Baxter, and Tony said, we need some riders. And, at that point, I dropped my pencil and pen. And he said, and I asked, pray tell, what do you mean by riders? He said, we've got to fill out the vehicle. It has 12 people. We have had water dummies. We actually have to have human beings now. How would you like to ride it? And I said, okay, I'm in the car right now. And before I got in the car, he said, oh, well, I understand your son's available. He's out of school. How would he like to ride it? Now, I try to be a good father. And, as a father of a then 9-year-old, I knew that if I hadn't said yes to this offer, I might as well just never come home. So time thereafter, Brian and I found ourselves standing at the load platform for Indiana Jones. Now, mind you, what kind of condition do you think that unopened ride was in when we stood there?
I have to assume some of the show sets were in place, but how many months out are we talking from the opening? In March 95.
Well, Disney works fast. Imagineers work faster. And so it was raw. We're talking as in raw steel, where there are carefully designated areas for us to walk along and not to step off of. And, oh, by the way, we've got our beautiful orange vests on and our hard hats. And Brian had protective gloves because he's 9. My old hands could have suffered. They didn't care.
Okay.
But we rode the ride, and it was literally, we would ride it through the scenes, and there was a man in back who would trigger the next sequence, because the ride was, it was there, but it wasn't fully baked in. And part of the reason we were there to ride was, frankly, to give a public reaction to what we were seeing. So,
holy cow.
Oh, it was a holy cow moment, exactly. It's one of those things you just can't, you can't make up.
Well, but at the same time, we were talking about this earlier, that was Bruce Gordon in the thing with you narrating the show scenes that hadn't been added yet, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. Bruce was in Brian and I were in the first row. I mean, right. Being a good dad, Brian had his hands on the steering wheel. But Bruce was in the second row. And so Bruce, being Bruce, didn't have his seatbelt on. He was leaning over and whispering in our ear, "This is where Mara is staring at you. Bad things happen here." And then there would be this sudden lurch, and we'd be rolling up the hill, and we'd say, "And that man over there with the big plastic bag, on him. That's an animatronic. That's Indiana Jones. Look impressed.
Okay.
And they would roll around the corner again. Oh, and last thing though, they did have the ice machine working. You know, have you? Oh, Jim, did you ever see the ice machine?
Just recently, you shared how they made the ice look that much more convincing, as if it were a real chunk of the ceiling caving in. And it really was kind of an ingenious idea.
No doubt, no doubt. Now, listeners, you have to go back into your way back with us here for a moment, your little time machine, because what I'm talking about is when this ride opened to the public, when you came around the corner past Indy into what they call the glory hole, which is that enormous room where you're looking at the skull of Mara. And there was a ray that came out of one of her eyes and hit the ceiling. And in response, what appeared to be large chunks of the stone temple ceiling collapsed and fell the equivalent of 2 stories and smashed to the floor below you. And this was real. I mean, you're looking at real dimensional objects, real noise from them shattering below you. And what Jim's talking about is, well, that's not really stone. That was actually ice, because on the roof of the building was this enormous industrial grade ice machine. And it was making ice. That's all its job was. And it was making ice colored with tea. And the tea color was to make it look as if it was stone. And that little machine was on the roof working away, grinding away, and chucking out these stone blocks every time a ride vehicle roared past.
What I love about the design is the ice would fall from the ceiling onto a heated metal plate, and then it would it was sort of a closed system, right?
Well, it was because you can't have a lot of tea, and everyone loves their hot tea drinks.
There we go.
Yeah, so they would melt the ice and then transport the melted water back up to the ice machine on the top of the building and to create more of those stone blocks.
But before we exit here, I love that you shared that the name of the big room, the Mara room, is the Glory Hole, because isn't that also the name of the room that basically inspired this, the thing over at Knott's?
Most indeed it was. Yes, there was another one of these, and it was the one over in Knott's Berry Farm, their first big dark ride, which was the Calico Mine Train.
There we go. The giant room you traveled through was the Glory Hole. So I love that Disney honored at least where they were cribbing it from. So since we're talking about Adventureland, I guess I should mention that while you, me, Len, and Guy were in the park, we strolled by the attraction formerly known as the Tarzan Treehouse, soon to be known as the Adventureland Treehouse, and we saw something really kind of rare in the park, the scrim. I mean, how typically when Disney will be doing work on a building, they'll set up a scrim to sort of keep prying eyes away and more to the point, to make the show elements, the park look attractive. I mean, all of us have been in the park when, for example, they're working on the castle and they'll set up a scrim that has an image of the castle in the front of it so people can get these photographs and that sort of thing. But that day, Mr. Shull and Mr. Tessa and I were walking through the park. The scrims had actually been pulled back, and we could see all 4 levels of the scaffolding that was around the Adventureland Treehouse. And when I pointed out to Mr. Shull, I've never seen that before, and you explained the very common sense reason as to why the scrim had been peeled back.
Well, yes, I pulled out my Occam's razor to point out the obvious. What we had in California for 4 months, we've had a lot of rain, and with rain comes high winds. And one thing scrims don't really like is to be blown around, and you really don't want one of those loose scrims to be flapping against the side of the tree house, or getting even worse, unloosened and wrapping itself around Space Mountain. So what the park does is they look at their weather forecast, and when they look and go, ooh, rain ahead, they come in just like your dining room curtains, they tie them back.
But again, it was fascinating to actually get to peer into the work that's going on there, which we will talk about in the future. Now, mind you, that same day that we went into Disneyland, Len and Mr. Shull and Guy and I hiked all the way back to Mickey's Toontown. And At that point, half the land basically was still behind construction fences, and we did get to ride the West Coast version of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, which has a very different queue than the one that's in place at Disney's Hollywood Studios, and that's built inside, of course, the old Chinese theater versus new custom space, and lots of I think smart choices. But what's interesting is that Jim, I think a day or so previous to this, we had been over at Universal Studios Hollywood and had done the Mario Kart ride there. And in fact, we did the standby line, folks. So
my feet are still hurting.
Yeah, but we walked the entire queue. And what's interesting when you do a queue with a veteran Imagineer like Mr. Shull is that there is an actual art to a really successful queue. And you had a lot of high praise for what the folks at Universal Creative had done with the Mario Kart queue, right?
Yeah, true. I mean, one of the rules you have is that people have short attention spans and they do get tired. So you always want to have rewards, weenies, if you will, at the end of a walkway. So at the end of a path, you want to have something at the end of that path they can look at and be excited by and be drawn to before they are asked to then make a sharp turn to the left and go down another long pathway, again, to be rewarded by something equally interesting that they can go and look at. So I give Mario Kart designers at Super Nintendo World at Universal Hollywood high praise because it was a very long queue. And admittedly, it's a ride that they need a long queue because it does attract a lot of people. But rather than just having a long set of switchbacks, they had a lot of eye candy for us to look at.
Well, and the same thing could be said for the West Coast queue for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. In fact, I mean, there was a lot of, I thought, really well-chosen, smart little detailing, that sort of thing. But you, as somebody who worked on the original iteration of Mickey's Toontown back in, dear Lord, that was 90. Okay, just last week. I'm sorry. You had some really kind things to say about, what the team that has just done the Mickey's Toontown redo.
Yeah, they did an excellent job. I mean, to be short and quick, you always worry that something has a lifespan, especially if it's tied to a character. And Mickey's Toontown in its point one has been there over 30 years. And with the renewal, I'm convinced it'll be there another 30 years because they were able to keep all the good values, the things that really attracted guests and engaged them and entertained them, and then altered them and revitalized them and refreshed them, so that they will attract for the next 30 years. I mean, I love the idea that now things that have been broken have been repaired or removed. I love the idea that they've opened it up with the grass lawn area, although it's artificial. I mean, we understand why. But already on Twitter, you can see where people are camping out on the new faux grass. Because after all, think about what a theme park or an amusement park is going to be at its heart. It's a place to relax. It's a folly. It's a place to rest with your family. And they were able to check all of those boxes with the new Mickey's Toontown.
One of the pluses that have been made for this new version of Mickey's Toontown is for the first time ever, and you got to remember, this is a character who came into the Disney lexicon the very same time that Mickey did. Pete has just come into the parks as a walk-around character, and what kind of intrigued me is in this same window of time, because face it, the character suit for Pete is big.
Oh, yeah. It's a big one.
But at the same time, in fact, you and I were talking about that amazing video coming out of Shanghai Disneyland where they were introducing the Red walk-around character of Pixar's Turning Red, who came dancing down the street at Shanghai Disneyland along with a bunch of folks from entertainment. And it's just sort of like, I can't imagine what it's like to have to perform in a suit like that, to interact with guests. Do you, Mr. Shull, you actually have some experience about some stories to share about being in a character of size walk-around suit?
Yeah, well, I'll share what I can share, and I will say this, that, we always talk about the size of the characters, but what you don't understand is the way the character is, made out of. it's a great way to lose weight. Because I came out of that and reached for, when I walked out backstage at the end of my time as a character, thankfully there were already the cast members there saying, here's a bottle of water. Here's another bottle of water. We've got another third bottle of water for you, because I needed all of them. To your point earlier, it's interesting how many of the characters now are big characters, because the character from Pixar's Turning Red, that's a big panda. And the same now with Pete. That's a big, he's a dog? I never was quite sure.
I'm always so impressed with how well the friends of Mickey, the folks who actually portray these characters in the park, the fact that when you think about, what they're experiencing inside of the suit, the limited sight lines, and the fact that the patience they have to have with the guests, and especially the little kids.
Oh, absolutely. But before we leave this subject, let's also share some love with the cast members who accompany the Friends of Mickey, because having worn that, having been a friend of Mickey, I can attest, I had limited sightline and views out, so I really need the cast member to kind of tap me on the back and say, I'm sorry to the guest. He has to leave now and go take a rest. Because otherwise, I may have still been out there. So shout out to the cast member.
Oh, well.
We love you guys.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Speaking of cool things that Mr. Shull has gotten to do at Disneyland, when we get back from this break, Jim and I are going to talk about the time that Mr. Shull got to tour the Haunted Mansion with the Disney legend we just lost just this last week, Rolly Crump. The average person has around 12 paid subscriptions. Now think about that. I myself, I thought as a household, Nancy and I were only subscribing to a handful of these services, but then I began actually counting. By that I mean we're signed up for 6 different broadcast services here at the house. Disney Plus, Hulu, Paramount Plus, Peacock, Netflix, and HBO Max. I subscribe to 4 different newspapers for work: the Orlando Sentinel, the Los Angeles Times, the Orange County Register, and the Charlotte Observer. I also maintain a membership with D23 for work-related reasons. Then there's our Chewy subscription. They send us cat food on a regular basis. And we have the very same arrangement with Critical Mass Coffee. Not for cat food, of course, but for coffee. And holy cow, that's 12 subscriptions right there without even breaking a sweat. Well, if you'd like to stay on top of all of your subscriptions and make sure you're canceling the ones you no longer use or want, might I suggest Rocket Money. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spendings, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Rocket Money will quickly and easily identify your subscriptions for you so you can stop paying for the ones you don't want. Simply find the subscription you don't want and press cancel, and Rocket Money will cancel it for you. No more long hold times with customer service or tedious emailing back and forth. Rocket Money makes canceling subscriptions as easy as the click of a button. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. To be honest, I'm not sure how much we've saved here at the house due to Rocket Money. What I can tell you is I use this personal finance app all the time to make sure that, whenever I sign up for a new newspaper or magazine, that's how I get access to the info I then use to create those stories that I share with Len over at Disney Dish. Rocket Money reminds me to shut down those very same accounts when I'm no longer using them. So this personal finance app has turned out to be a really valuable tool. So stop throwing your money away. Cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. That's rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. One more time for the kids in the back. rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. We thank them for sponsoring today's show.
Every Who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one Who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and no prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
The detective said missing kids usually come home What happens when they don't?
Based on a true story.
Police looking for John Gacy.
We discovered bodies. By the looks of it, they're younger men. The things he did to those kids. He's sick.
The system failed these families.
Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Do you know how many there are?
Up to you to find out.
We obviously knew that we needed to pay a tribute to the late, great Roland Fargo Crump. By the way, I love that his middle name was Fargo, who passed away on March 12th at the age of 93. And, and look, there's a lot of tributes, and deservedly so, to Rolly out there online right now. But, Jim, you actually worked with Rolly. In fact, you two were assigned to work on different aspects of the Epcot's Wonder of Life Pavilion, right? You did the Goofy About Health show, while Rolly, given what he did, for example, with the Tower of the Four Winds and that sort of thing, but they brought him back to do the mobile that was at the top of that Future World Pavilion, right?
Yeah. I mean, and why wouldn't they? Because, when you think about Disneyland, well, I don't think you'd have a Disneyland without people like Mary Blair and Claude Coates and Mark Davis and of course, Rolly Crump, because they set the style for Disneyland. Every small world you see, if you go to Tokyo Disneyland, you see a version of the small world clock that Rolly designed. The same with Paris, the same with Hong Kong, and so on. These are the original Imagineers who set the style for the company and all of their 12 theme parks worldwide.
You start at the company in 88. And let's be honest here, there's kind of a changing of the guard that's going on. But there's still enough of the old guard who are still in the building. And more to the point, you have a Marty Sklar at the head of Imagineering, who believes quite strongly in the idea that you learn by doing. In fact, you were telling that wonderful story recently about, in order to work with audio animatronic figures, didn't they actually make you at one point clean out the machine that the latex was stirred
Oh, yeah.
in?
I had the honor of cleaning out the injection molding machine that they would make hands and faces out of. And believe me, it was not glamorous. But your point was well taken, that Marty really did believe in teaming up people who had experience with newbies. And in my case, in 1988, I was a newbie. And because Rolly and I were both assigned to Wonders of Life, Marty one day teamed me up with Rolly, and he became my mentor.
What I love about how Marty did this was that, figuring, okay, again, you have to learn by doing. And if you're going to build attractions, you have to see attractions, but not see them from the ride vehicle, like literally feet on the ground. So can you talk about what Marty decided that you should do one day with Rolly?
Well, one day, I got a call, and by the way, this is before computers, so a call was actually a phone call, and I picked up the phone, and I heard, Marty will be on the line.
Yeah.
And I wait, and then Marty saying, I want you to go down to Anaheim with Rolly will drive. And so I'm going, and remember, I'm new, so I'm just like, okay, sir, wherever you want, I'll go there right now. Not really knowing why I was going. So I'm in the car with Rolly, and I'm just listening, and there aren't enough pages in a notebook to fill what he told me during the hour drive down to Anaheim from Glendale. But that was Marty's intent, that by teaming somebody new to Imagineering with somebody who worked on the original Imagineering to create Imagineering, he was imparting to me tribal knowledge. Because it wasn't a case of walking into a room for a 1-hour lecture. It was literally walking in Rolly's footsteps. And Marty wanted me to go with him to see an attraction, to get a case study. And the case study on this early morning tour was the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. And when I say early morning, I mean getting up at 4 a.m., getting to Glendale at 4:30, being there for Rolly with 2 cups of coffee, and loading into his car, and off we go.
Okay, so I'm picturing you guys, you make the turn off of Harbor, you go through the Harbor House gate, you park backstage. So this is Rolly. So he's got to take you over to the Tiki house. Again, this is Rolly, the guy who worked on Tiki. So you went there, right?
You're so right. And remember, Rolly was like having the golden ticket. We drove right through Harbor House. I think he stopped. I'm not sure to this day. We went under the trestle of the main street where the railroad went, and we parked right behind Main Street, jumped out of the car, still holding his cup of coffee for him, and we hightailed it over down through the hub, past the Tiki room, and while we're going, Rolly at a mile a minute is going, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that, but keep walking. And so then we walk over to the Haunted Mansion, and, we get to the Haunted Mansion, but we don't go in the front door. We go in Rolly's front door, and it was a completely different experience.
You mean you went around to the side, to where the original Pet Cemetery was, right?
Yes, the weedy lot that somebody somewhere in the past went and bought 2 pet statues and put them in the area, and it's just behind the exit crypt that guests come out of the ride from. But we went around on the backside of that crypt into this weedy field where the pet cemetery original one was built, and we walked alongside the mansion, and then there was a door right inside the mansion, again, something guests would never otherwise see, and Rolly opened the door, and we walked inside and walked into a completely different world. Although it was the Haunted Mansion, it didn't look like anything you'd ever seen before.
Well, that's, again, what I love about when you get to do something like this is that the guests know this thing by heart. In fact, we're just a couple of months out now from the next Haunted Mansion movie that's coming to theaters.
That's right. Yeah.
But the space you entered was the one that the cast members know, or more to the point, the one that the Imagineers, when they were building this thing back in '69, spent hours in.
Yeah, true. But remember, what the guests see is important, because what the guests see is a big southern plantation house. What I saw when Rolly opened the door was a big old steel warehouse filled with theatrical sets. Because remember, what they would do is they built this warehouse, but they didn't build the sets there. They built them in a factory, in a prop warehouse, in a set warehouse. And I'm using a lot of names that were common to that era, because it's very much inspired by how you build a movie studio set piece or a theatrical set piece flat. These are all set piece theatrical flats that are built off-site, and then when they're ready, they're trucked down to Anaheim, and then they're supervised by an art director like a Rolly Crump, who's then going to bless them as they're assembled to create the show that eventually guests will ride through.
You were mentioning that you came across this amazing photograph from, like 4 months prior to the attraction opening. And well, explain to people what really struck you about the mansion 4 months before it opened.
How quickly it was built, Jim. How quickly it was built. 4 months before the ride opened to the guests, I came across a couple of photographs, but one in particular really stood out, because it was a photograph taken inside the mansion looking back toward the trestle where the train, the Disneyland Railroad, would chug its way through the mansion. And it was bare space. I could see the trestle, I could see the rails, I could see concrete, I could see the ride track, and I could see nothing else, because 4 months out from opening, none of the show had been installed.
First of all, I'm hoping that we get, Jim has shared this amazing photograph of, well, you're sitting at the organ in the grand ballroom. And, well, no, you got to tell that story.
Okay, well, I can tell this story, even if we can't share the photograph. But I was standing there with Rolly Crump, the designer of the Haunted Mansion, and we were standing in the ballroom scene. You know, the one where there's that giant organ with the ghost organist? Well, Rolly's standing there next to me, and he said, "Sit over there." Where is there, Rolly? On the bench. Sit on the bench. And so a moment ago, in time, I was sitting there on the bench. He says, "Look at me," and he pulls out a camera, and he takes a photograph of me, and I have this wonderful photograph of me sitting there looking like an idiot, playing the keys on the organ in the Haunted Mansion ballroom.
Oh, that is so cool.
It is cool, but again, you can't get that. That was, again, going back to Marty's idea of, it's the tribal knowledge, because when Rowley did that, it opened up a whole set of stories, and, he'd say, "Oh, by the way, in the same ballroom, oh, there's the ghost flame. That's just a fan and a piece of cellophane and a green light, don't you?" And we're going, "Oh, let me take this down." But that was the point. That was 1,000 stories shared that day.
Rowley's attention to detail was amazing. In fact, I think you were talking previously about, so you finish up the tour, you're hiking back to the car, you're headed through Frontierland, and you come across some green grass in Frontierland, which Rowley, who could be grumpy, suddenly went off, right?
Yeah, grumpy is a kind term. In the dictionary under grumpy, there's a picture of Rowley Crump. But yeah, what you're talking about is back in the day, in that era, when you walked into Frontierland, in the planters, there was this beautiful golf course quality grass. And unprovoked, Rowley turned to me and said, "Oh, that's Dick Nunes. He hates dirt. He hates cactus, and he never read a history book in his life." And I went, "Okay, let's move it on."
There we go. But you had this amazing experience, and the two of you worked together on Wonders of Life. And when you talk about Rowley Crump, it's not just the work he did at Disneyland. It's also, for example, the stuff he did for Knott's. Like that. How many Southern Californians, have really fond memories of the Knott's Berry Tales attraction that Rowley built for that park. And it says a lot about who Rowley Crump was as a man and an artist, that, well, the famous story of they had a fire when they were getting ready to open that attraction in Buena Park, and there was a fire, and a number of show scenes got destroyed, and Rowley didn't even blink. It's just sort of, okay, we had a fire, let's get back to work. And They recreated the scenes. They damn near got that thing open for its original opening date, right?
That's true. But again, that's a testimony to Rowley's strength as being a designer, not somebody who just sat at his desk and drew, but actually who built things. Remember all the stories about him taking paper clips and bits of wire and making pinwheels in his office in Dimensional Design there in Disney, in Glendale, and how that would attract people because he would build things. So yeah, sure, there's a fire in Knott's Berry Farm, Berry Tales ride. Yeah, whatever. Let's go out there and get a hammer and some saw and some wood and rebuild it and open it on time.
Another thing you pointed out, and I think this is crucial to understand, that people have this tendency to sort of pigeonhole Rowley. That talk about, for example, Tower of the Four Winds or the Clock Face. It's a small world, and they talk about his wonderful whimsical touches and that sort of thing. And you seem to think that falls short of understanding who really Rowley Crump is, right?
Yeah, because again, Walt Disney was great at casting people, and at WDI, he would pick people who did cute. He picked people who did horror. He had people who did environment. But Rowley didn't do cute, but he did do whimsy. But I would add to that, it was whimsy with an edge. Because if you had 5 designs on a table, you could always pick out which design was Rowley's. Because it was always sincere, it always had an edge. His lines were always sharp. They never resolved in a curve. There was always a point, literally a point to what he did. And he could always tell you not only what the design meant, but how he would build it, which is, again, the famous story about the beautiful model he did in Glendale of the Tower of the Four Winds. And once it got engineered to withstand all the storms that you have on the East Coast, well, it had bulked up. And so when he was asked what he thought of the actual object, the Tower of the Four Winds that was installed there in New York, he was less than kind, but he was honest.
And that's one of the things I love about Rowley, is he was his own man at Imagineering.
True.
And by the way, that legacy lives on with, what his son, Chris Crump, did as well.
Chris is absolutely another Crump who I've worked with.
Okay, folks. So thank you, Mr. Shull, for sharing, the story about your tour of the mansion with again, Roland Fargo Crump, who, and on behalf of Mr. Testa, Mr. Shull, and myself, we extend our heartfelt condolences to the Crump family at this sad time. And Rolly is a guy who genuinely will be missed. I mean, I think it always says something that when we lose somebody at the age of 3 or 93, and people talk about he went too soon. You can't have much more of a tribute than that.
Let's all go out and build a pinwheel now.
There we go.
Okay, folks, that's going to do it for the show today. You can help support this show and Jim Hill Media by subscribing over at the disneydish.bandcamp.com, where you'll find exclusive shows never be heard before on iTunes. Good news, Len will be back behind the mic next week, unless he decides to continue his search for pirate treasure. You can find more of Jim Hill at jimhillmedia.com, not to mention more of Len Testa at terrainplans.com, and you can even follow me on Twitter at Jim Shull. We're produced fabulously by Aaron Adams, who will be traveling to Spartansburg, South Carolina in the coming week, so that he can then debate the merits of dry rub versus marinade with some genuine barbecue enthusiasts at the 10th annual Hub City Hogfest, which will then be held in and around Morgan Square March 31st through April 1st. Please take a moment to go to iTunes and rate our show and tell us what you would like to hear next. Until the next Disney Dish, for Jim Hill, this is Jim Shull sitting in for Len Testa. Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next show.